much for having me, and I'd like to thank the Gulf Business Network team for facilitating this process, and I appreciate the lovely introduction. Just to give you all a quick background on Lifebound, we are a social impact company, and we work with individuals and organizations to promote successful transitions. So as you had mentioned, we do a lot of coaching training. We also create customized learning content and materials to facilitate a transformational process. In my role at Lifebound, as you mentioned, I consult with organizations and I also do coaching trainings. A lot of my work has been with higher education institutions, but I have been privileged to work with various international manufacturing companies, small businesses, and non-governmental organizations. So as we go through this session today and talk about coaching and how it can be used to facilitate change management and disruption, I would really ask you all to keep ideas and insights you have, and then we'll be opening it up for comments and questions in just a bit. So let's go ahead and start with looking at what the future will require of businesses. And there's an acronym that we use a lot in the United States, and it is VUCA, V-U-C-A. And it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think all of us who've been involved with the business world in the last 20 years know that we are in a VUCA environment. And I read somewhere recently where they were talking about technology, and that technology today has about a 5-year shelf life, that it's introduced into the marketplace, it's used, it's absorbed, but it can become obsolete within about 5 years. And just that alone creates a lot of volatility that businesses are trying to adapt to. Another thing that we're all facing are things very much beyond our control. For example, the climate. The New York Times Magazine did an interesting article last November, and they were just looking at the melting ice. And they said that between the increase in temperatures, which causes water to expand, the melting ice at the poles, and the glaciers that are breaking off, are currently having an impact of the sea rising about 3.3 millimeters a year, or 1/10 of an inch. So with just that amount, there are hundreds of actuaries that are employed now looking at what will be the effect on businesses, governments, and infrastructure if these sea levels continue to rise, and ultimately what would happen if this continues and we have to evacuate New York City, Shanghai, Calcutta, Hong Kong, the Netherlands. Huge, huge impacts on our economy and on our businesses with something that's very much out of our control. Another thing that's affecting businesses is the changing type of roles that we're seeing happen within the economy. We're moving away from an economy that's solely built on tangible goods and tangible services, and we're moving into an economy that is based on the power of ideas, and these ideas are changing the wealth structure in the world. Let's look at a few examples. Here are 3 organizations that have international reach and that are really changing the face of business. One is Airbnb. This accommodations organization now is the largest hotel type of operation in the world, and yet they don't own one physical piece of property. We look at Facebook that has used around the world, and they don't supply one bit of content. It is just a website for people to pour in their own content. You look at the taxi organization Uber, and they now are operating around the world, and yet they don't own one taxi cab. So these businesses are based on incredible ideas. They pull together a different type of demand within the economy, and they are shifting the jobs available for people that would work in middle management structures. Once again, they're putting a huge pressure on the future of businesses and how they will respond in this environment. So what can businesses do? First, really rely on analytics. There's less time for trial and error, and so what we're seeing is that the more data that we can use to drive informed decisions, the easier it is for businesses to effectively respond. Businesses must move very quickly. Speed is paramount. They must be service-oriented. In a time when things are changing so quickly, the value of the customer-business relationship can never be more important. And the last, businesses must be adaptable. They must be able to see trends, to see where they can adapt to either survive or to gain market share. And so we're going to spend most of our time today around this idea of adaptability and how we can promote that. So let's look at what drives change. We have both the internal forces, whether it's technology innovations that allow for streamlined processes, whether it's potential for expansion, for growth, to enhance a performance or a service that is delivered. These are internal forces that can create a need for change within our organization. And then the external forces can be changes in the economic conditions, a change in global capital flow, different policy or political changes. We talked about the climate, different merger and acquisitions that change the marketplace you operate within. Labor mobility is a huge one that is facing many of the European nations right now. So an example that I'd like to share is an organization that I've been speaking with, and it's a religious organization that works with youth development, and they're facing a huge change in the culture, that the religious culture has changed and how teens now move in and participate in their organization is very different. So they're facing a very strong outside external change that is affecting how they're going to manage their business, and I'll be referring to them a little bit later. So what are some of the biggest disruptors that we're facing today? From a macro large-scale perspective, we can definitely point towards globalization, and we all know that that's been a huge driver for 20 plus years, but the cultural impact is very huge. So even organizations that were doing a lot of manufacturing in some Asian companies, the impact on that has changed the labor force, the emergence of a middle class, and now all of a sudden the rules that people were playing by in manufacturing in some of these places are changing. Or ideas becoming obsolete on the marketplace. I was doing some work with an organization that had developed some innovative voice over internet protocol technology. By the time they got their technology in place, they launched it, they put it to market, they started really driving the business with it, the technology had become obsolete. So the time that it takes for ideas to travel is a huge disruptor because the technology changes faster than it might take time for implementation. We all know that political decisions and different things that are mandated on a national or an international arena will be a huge disruptor for some of our businesses. And then technology, like we've talked about. So these are some of the things that are forcing us to really make decisions about the work that we're going to do and how we're going to move through the market. So how do you decide whether change is really worth taking on within your organization? Imagine you're a manufacturer of sports clothing and you can buy another company that will extend you into sporting footwear. A change like this might offer potential gains and opportunities. It will allow you the opportunity to increase your market share, possibly strengthen your brand. So it might be a very positive change and might be easier to create the buy-in you need within the team to make it happen. On the other hand, it can be a little more complicated if you're facing an external force. Imagine you're a restaurant chain and you have to cut overhead so that you remain competitive in your market. You might decide to automate some of your processes, eliminate jobs, maybe outsource certain services to reduce operating costs. And a change here that will allow you to adapt to a shifting business climate will make you able to survive, but will be much harder to galvanize support because it can be very costly personally for the people that work with you. So whether you're considering to make changes for gains or for adaptations to reduce costs, you'll have to really start by assessing potential gains and costs. And another thing that's very important in the consulting work that we do is really looking at what do you do, how will it look if you do nothing? So you can analyze what will it look like if you make the changes that you're thinking about, and what will it look like if you do nothing. And you project that out 5 years, and that difference right there then really can become your why you're making the change, how you can justify what you're going to do, and how you create buy-in for your stakeholders, your employers, and your customers, so that they're willing to ride the storm of change with you. So let's imagine that change is something that is going to work for your organization and you're going to move through it. How do you best manage it? And of course, this is an age-old question that businesses have really wrestled with since the beginning of time. I think what's different today is that we're really looking at how do you manage change quickly and effectively, because the market is competitive, and if we're not effective, change might cost us rather than helping improve our situation, and we have to change quickly. So on this slide, we'll look a little bit at, how transportation has changed. And when we went from horse to Model Ts to Google cars, originally there was quite a bit of time with that change, a time to absorb the different shifts in the economy. So you might have 100 years for the new jobs to come into place and people to find different kinds of employment and for new niche markets to evolve. But now the changing speed is happening faster and faster. So if we look at let's take, for example, the Palm Pilot. 10 years ago, people were using these personal devices that shifted then to Blackberries, to now a lot of people use iPhones. In just 10 years, that technology has radically changed, putting companies completely out of business and systems in a complete overhaul mode. Think back 10 years ago, people paid for an email account, and now there's Gmail. So companies like American Online, they're obsolete now. Once people used maps, and within the last 10 years they shifted to GPS services. Now a lot of people will just consult Siri or an application on their telephone. So the rate of change is the thing that I think is really affecting businesses. So if you're a business and you need to change quickly, some of the things that are important as you think about reorganizing your infrastructure, merging your business, start with looking at who will a change impact most, and really looking at the individual. These people, if they are not addressed properly, can become the huge derailers of any kind of change management. And so I like to think about what I call the empathy grid when I'm thinking about who are the individuals that will be impacted most by change. And I like to ask 4 questions. 1, what will these people be saying? What will they be doing? What will they be thinking? And how will they be feeling? And if the management team can really address those 4 questions for the people who will be impacted most, I think they'll be able to uncover many of the obstacles that the change process will present. The second step is really planning for systems within the organization that might be most affected. Will this affect your distribution sites most? Will it affect your engineering team? Will it affect your accounting department? But really looking at which systems within your organization will be effective, and creating, once again, a plan by going through those empathy questions. The next is creating a step-by-step plan and timeline that is both transparent and not arbitrary in terms of time. And this, what I've seen from my experience, can be one of the biggest challenges, that change is taken on in a very quick tempo without really checking what the rate of absorption can be within any given organization, and it's different. I like to go back to the metaphor of dancing, and if you have a partner and they're dancing, or a couple and they're dancing, if one person changes their rhythm and moves more quickly, the dance falls apart. That has to be in sync. And so when we really look at managing change, how can we make sure that everybody can change with the same rhythm and the same tempo? Doing this will help us address some of the unintended consequences, and then we will talk a little bit more now on how we can set up coaching strategies to facilitate some of these processes that will help us communicate the criteria for success, and how we can use coaching as a way to address what our plans are, assess the work that's being done, and measure how these changes are really helping or hurting the organization. The one thing we do have to consider first, though, is how do we manage misconceptions? And there are some common ones. Many organizations will launch into change by believing that technology is magic. Technology can do the trick. We just have to get these new programs running and we'll be all right. But we often overlook what is the human component that goes with the technology, because the human component is where things will either thrive or die. We also have the misconception that change is a straight line. If we do X, Y will result. And we often know that's not the case. If we do X, we don't anticipate that Z results, that we have to deal with Z to get back over to Y. So really being flexible and adaptable in our process is going to be important. Sometimes we believe that change is fast and easy. And if we don't really look at, once again, what is the speed that our organization can adjust to changes, we will be putting ourselves in a very frustrating environment. And the last one I'd like to just mention briefly is that there's a belief oftentimes that the leaders don't need to be involved with the day-to-day operations of change. And this is an area I truly disagree with. I feel that leaders do need to be strategic and on the high level, but they need to be involved in the day-to-day operations. They need to show their face. They need to be in touch with what some of the challenges are. They need to be connected with the people who are experiencing the upheaval. And if they can build that kind of cohesiveness and that kind of relationship, they'll be able to manage the change process much more effectively. So this is an old quote, but one that I think is very valuable today, and it's that successful companies develop a culture that keeps moving all the time, that they're able to stay relevant and keep up with the current trends so that they're able to be providing their services and their goods in ways that are meeting the needs of the people in the economy. But how do we do this? How do we keep a company alive that is ready to move in position to take change at any point? Part of this will be building a coaching culture that will give you tools for adapting to change. So let's begin by looking at this word culture. What do we really mean? And this word is thrown around quite a bit, but if we look at culture as the deep level of basic assumptions and beliefs that are shared by members of an organization, and that these assumptions and beliefs are what people engage and operate from, that is truly our culture. And often we look at what our mission statement is or what our vision is and say that's our culture. But that's not always the case, and sometimes we have beliefs and assumptions within our culture that are counter to our vision or our mission and can be a problem for us. So if we address what are the underlying beliefs that we're operating from, and what are the assumptions that we're holding on to, and we start to analyze how those align with the changes we're trying to fit, we're going to be in a better mode for managing change and for adapting to some of these upheavals. So you might ask yourself, are you an organization that sets standards, that meets a need in the community, that responds in a dynamic way to shifting problems? Or are you an organization that's slow-moving, that follows trends, or that's opposed to them, that tends to fill gaps in the marketplace rather than setting the trends? And knowing these things about yourself and your organization can help. At the same time, I think we have to look at what the culture of our organization is today and where the culture of our organization needs to be 5 to 10 years out. And being able to think in this forward manner and aligning our beliefs and our assumptions in a way that facilitates this 5-year out plan is going to be critical. And the coaching process becomes an invaluable tool for facilitating this kind of forward thinking and strategic planning. Because at the heart of the coaching process, there needs to be buy-in, there needs to be a gathering of ideas from the group, there needs to be ownership of the processes, and it's hard to create this kind of culture and this kind of way of working from a very top-down authoritative process. So if we go back to that organization I mentioned earlier that I was speaking with that was doing some of the religious work with a youth development organization, when I asked their board if they were aligned with their mission, they said absolutely. They were very set on what the purpose of the organization is and why they existed. But when we started to look at where they would be in 5 to 10 years and how they would be able to maintain this strong sense of purpose, but to be able to bring people into their fold so that it will be alive and thriving in 10 years, there was huge disagreement. And really what it came down to was the cultural impact that was having on the young people today, that maybe they weren't believing the same things, they weren't seeing the role of their religious life in the same way. And so this how to grow became a huge shift in how they were perceiving their culture and their next steps. And it became a great coaching opportunity to really create some kind of alignment within the organization. But let's back up and just address what is coaching, so then we can talk about how coaching can be used for change management. There are many definitions of coaching, and the coaching businesses are thriving in the area of business, of health, of academics. At Lifebound, we define coaching as a partnership to produce deepened learning and awareness, to determine targeted actions that can be taken for agreed upon results. So coaching in a nutshell is a relationship with an organization or a group. And in this process, you'll engage in deep reflection, you'll see challenging of ideas and assumptions, you'll see the stretching of abilities and shifts in perspectives, all towards generating forward action and powerful results towards a common goal. So I like to use the sports metaphor when I talk about coaching, because coaching is often, when people hear the word, their mind goes to the sports arena because it's a popular use of the word. But there is something within this coaching metaphor that I think can be powerful when we think about how coaching can be used in a change management process. And if you think about coaching and it's game time and it's a sporting event, ask yourself, where do the players go at game time and where do the coaches go? Hopefully you'll get an image in your mind of the coaches moving to the sideline and the players going out to the field. And it's not that the coaches leave or abandon the players, but they're operating from the sideline where the players are actually doing the work, they're doing the problem solving, they're doing the thinking, they're doing the generating of ideas, and the coach there is facilitating the process. And so when we take this metaphor and we move it into the business arena, we want to remember that coaching is not about giving advice. It's not direct consulting, but it's rather facilitating a performance-oriented process. Coaching takes time, but it's a great model for really improving performance, for moving the needle and helping facilitate ownership of action. So when we put this into a change management context, we can look at how can coaches really facilitate engaging employees in a different change process, asking for their input, getting their commitments on what they're able to do to move the change process forward, having them reflect on what the anticipated obstacles are, and identifying resources that might be helpful for the company to supply to support their change. So, a manager can offer advice to an employee. Perhaps this employee is balancing a huge caseload, but the company has mandated new reporting requirements. A coach might pose questions and hold the space for the employee to analyze the situation, to prioritize their time, to create ideas for more efficient processes, and to put steps in place. But if these ideas are generated by the employee instead of being told to the employee through a manager, there's less buy-in. So we really like to work with the coaching process where the employee is coming up with the ideas and making commitments that really address the problems he or she is facing. Now, it does take time, but you'll see that through a coaching process, there's increased engagement, there's increased ownership, and increased job satisfaction. So how does coaching help you address the human side of change management in an effective way? And part of it is the buy-in that I just spoke about when we have the employee engaged in the problem-solving process, and they're also engaged in the solutions. They're going to have more ownership for it. But to coach for certain outcomes, we must look at what abilities we need to adjust so that change in the organization can happen. So here is a triangle to help us kind of look at that. We're looking at the top. What abilities do we need our employers to have so that effective change can come to place? And oftentimes when we are managing a change process with an organization, we stay up in that purple zone only. We're really looking at, okay, what abilities do our employees need? Do they need to know how to master a new technology? Do they need to know how to go out and close certain sales deals? What are the abilities we need to do? But we fail to address the behaviors, the choices, and the drive. And coaching can be very powerful for us to do that. If we're building relationships with our employees and we're really looking at what behaviors and mindsets and attitudes do we need our employees to have so that they can execute the abilities, then our conversations are going to look very different. And if we can take those conversations with our employees and go a little bit deeper and look at not only what behaviors do we need, but what choices are we needing our employees to make so that they're demonstrating the behaviors that will lead to the concrete abilities we need to effectively manage our businesses, we're going to be moving into the right zone. So what are those choices we're coaching around? How are our employees showing up? How are they willing to take initiative and drive new processes? What choices are they making in terms of working and collaborating with people, in terms of bringing value-adding ideas to the table, in terms of questioning things and raising issues, maybe in a culture that doesn't really promote that, but that will really help their abilities to do their job. And finally, coaching can help us get at the drive. How can we really create a sense of internal drive and motivation in our employees so that they'll make the shift to manage the change? And I'll be talking a little bit about that drive in a few minutes, so we'll go ahead and move on from this at this point. I would like to just share one example of a pharmaceutical company that I know, and there was one particular manager within this company that took time to build coaching relationships with his sales representatives. And it was interesting because none of his counterparts with the organization were doing that. They would have their annual performance review with their sales reps, but they wouldn't really take time to engage in these deeper level coaching conversations. And one of the young women in the organization said that she stayed at this company 3 years longer than she originally planned because of this deep relationship with her manager. She felt that her manager really cared about her total career, about her work-life balance, about her job satisfaction, and she in turn said that it caused her to really be motivated to do a better job for both this manager and for the organization because she felt a commitment as a human being more than just as an employee. And I thought it was a great example of the power of coaching, and what this manager noticed within 2 or 3 years of implementing more of a coaching strategy with his sales reps, he had greater retention within his sales force than any other manager within the organization. So it was a pretty good example of this shift of management style and how it really impacted his ability to manage and perform for the company. So how can you create coaching networks that help your managers, your teams, and your employees not just survive, but really thrive in the work they're doing? First, it's about creating opportunities for employees and managers to learn about the coaching model and how it can positively impact their work as well as the work of those they manage. And these opportunities can start small. It can be within a department, it could be a pilot project, it could be within a particular team. It might be as the pharmaceuticals manager did, replacing standard performance reviews and instead incorporating quarterly coaching sessions with each of the people that you manage. It can start small and one department at a time. However, it's really important to provide adequate training for the managers so that they really know what real coaching is, that it's about building strong rapport. It's about asking coachees powerful questions. It's about setting concrete goals and performance action plans. It's about measuring what's happening. So there are some very concrete coaching skills that need to be utilized rather than just using the word coaching and then kind of having the management style the same as it's always been. We can look at creating how coaching will roll out with an organization, and then really tracking the return on investment, which is critical for overall buy-in. So an example I like to share is some work we did with a large research university here in the United States, and they wanted to implement a coaching plan. They had very specific goals around student retention and around shoring up some processes that helped their delivery of services in a way that would impact their bottom line. They put a coaching program into place that involved the president of the institution, the provosts, the deans, all the way down to some of the graduate students. So they had the full spectrum of employees within the institution engaged. And what they found was that they had huge successes in putting this program into place, in employee engagement, in student retention, more effective processes. And so when they looked at the money they saved against the cost they put into instituting the coaching program, they had a huge return on investment. So it not only helped morale, but it did help the bottom line, and then it helped them take this idea of creating a culture like this in the institution and moving it across the different areas. So if we want to really be thinking about how coaching can drive the motivation and adaptability and flexibility, we want to go back to that triangle a little bit and look at how coaching influences drive and motivation. So first, let's talk just about how coaching provides an opportunity to engage everyone around the changes that are happening, to help them understand why the change is needed, what the impact will be if no change takes place, and how they can personally align with the change in the organization's mission. So it's very hard if managers are telling employees this is what we have to do and you have to be on board. But if they can ask the powerful questions to engage the employees to say, what is in it for them? Why will they be better off if they're able to find a way to assist this process, to engage in it, to take ownership of it? Then there's going to be forward movement by everyone and less of the derailer type of mentality of people that are going to work against what's happening. We can't dictate or drive this motivation. It must be cultivated through such a coaching process. So there is a book that I think is kind of powerful. It's written by a gentleman, Daniel Pink, and he was the author of A Whole New Mind and another book titled Drive. And in his book Drive, he identifies 3 key factors that affect motivation, and they're mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And in terms of mastery, if we can think about how coaching can help us work with employees to attain a level of mastery that will then drive their motivation. The coaching exchange helps us work with employees to look at where their strengths are, where their challenges are. It helps us take an honest assessment of what their skill levels are. And really, to attain mastery in any given situation, the tasks have to be challenging so they're still inspiring, but they can't be impossible or out of reach. And so there really needs to be a strong fit between the employee and the work this employee needs to do. And coaching can help a manager work with an employee to pull forth the effort that they need to work towards achievement. But it can also help a manager work with an employee to honestly assess if this job is the right fit. With effort, will they be able to reach a certain level of mastery that will let them feel good about the work they're doing? So through this process, we're moving employees to a place of mastery that can drive their performance, their satisfaction, and hopefully their motivation that will help us assist with change. Second, let's look at this idea of autonomy. As a manager, you can ask yourself, where can you give employees some autonomy around these changes that are happening? Where can you let them explore what they want to bring to the table so that they can have some ownership in driving the process and benefiting from this sense of autonomy that research shows does affect motivation? The search for these opportunities for autonomy is one that can be done together with the manager or employee through this coaching framework. And coaching can be a powerful tool to facilitate this type of exploration. The third factor that drives motivation, according to Pink, is this idea of purpose. And in my work in coaching, I feel like this is the element that is the biggest determinant of drive and motivation. However, it's also the determinant that might not necessarily be completely linked to the organization or the change process that is happening. So this is the opportunity for a coaching framework to be used so that a manager can really take some time to see the employee as a whole person and what might be going on in that employee's life that can give them a sense of purpose and help them align with the work that the organization is doing. So whether the employee is driven by providing well for their family, for being a role model, working towards an ultimate goal outside of the organization, how can you harness that sense of purpose through coaching to really help them show up at the workplace in a wholehearted, high-performance manner? And this is going to lead us to our last slide and our last kind of talking point before we open it up for question and comments. And it's how can we work with millennials who now make up a significant percentage of the workforce, and how can we as managers understand and coach them to really be addressing their need for mastery, their desire for autonomy, their sense of purpose in the workforce. So let's talk just a minute about how coaching can help you manage a millennial workforce. There's a current global phenomenon right now that millennials on average stay on their jobs for less than 2 years. And this change in the labor force can be very costly for employers. I read a study recently that was conducted in the United States, but it said that every time a millennial leaves a job, it costs the company on average $15,000 to $25,000 US for lost time, lost recruitment costs, loss in training costs, and loss in productivity. So definitely a problem that we want to address and hopefully can use coaching to address. Many millennials will cite that the company isn't a strong cultural fit. So how can we use coaching to create a culture that aligns with the vision of the organization, but at the same time creates space, environment, and opportunity for this millennial demographic that is influencing the workforce? So let's look just at a few things that are driving millennials today. One, they like a sense of purpose, and this purpose sometimes is even more important than receiving a paycheck. They look for organizations that are rooted in a mission for positive impact. And maybe your organization isn't necessarily rooted in positive impact. It might be about producing noodles for a pasta company. But what can you create with the operations within the culture of your organization that can have positive impact? And this can be a great leadership opportunity for millennials to give them a sense of autonomy and say, what in our organization can we be doing that's innovative, that can make a strong impact on the community around us, and how can you drive that process? And opportunities like that for engaging millennials can be very powerful and create a strong buy-in to the overall work that an organization does. Taking time to also coach millennials around their goals and their values and their personal sense of purpose can help create opportunities for them to find root in what an organization is doing and commit to them over time. And then finally, taking time to coach millennials around their long-term growth plans and their promotion track. If they can see a way of growing within the organization, if they can have a mentor that they can look up to and understand what is it like to be in this culture over time, this can help create a pathway for the millennials, and especially for our millennials that are joining the workforce that might not be traditionally represented within your organization, whether they're from a different culture, whether they're women and it's a male-based culture, or vice versa. How do we create coaching opportunities and mentor tracks so that we're engaging them and helping them see long-term where they might live and thrive within your organization? Another thing that's important to do as managers of millennials in organizations that are facing change is to be very careful when you're hiring and to take time to look for young people who are adaptable and flexible. So as a hiring manager, you might ask the question, when have you experienced a situation where partway through the process everything changed? and ask this person being interviewed how they managed it. What was it like for them? How comfortable were they? What did they learn from it? So as a manager, being able to hire staff that can handle ambiguity, that are not rooted in definite black and white systems will be really helpful when you're trying to create a team that adapts to rapid change in the economy. I know I've been working with a startup company in a situation, and we've had some staff where they were incredibly bright. Um, what we realized, though, that if people have a very strong black and white mentality, that can be excellent in an organization that is bound by some very strict rules and protocols. However, in a startup environment, when there's a lot of change, a lot of quick shifts, a lot of dynamic growing, that can be more challenging, and so it might be better to really be looking for somebody that thrives in a more ambiguous environment. So as we wrap up and open it up to questions, I thought I'd like to just add one final thought, and that's around this idea of how do we use coaching to facilitate a process where failure is acceptable and failure is part of the growth cycle. How can we use coaching at the same time to move away from a blame culture? Because in this era of change, of quick adaptability, it really puts us in a place of possible failure very quickly. And that can, if we have a culture and attitude that is very down on failure, it's going to make your company and your people in your company less open to change. I was listening to a group of Japanese female entrepreneurs yesterday, and they were talking about this difficulty within the culture in their working environment in Japan because failure has such a negative connotation. And one of the women had done quite a bit of work in Silicon Valley in the United States, and she talked about just the difference in attitude that the company in the Silicon Valley was built upon taking risks, on collaboration, on doing things that were out of the norm, and how that almost created an environment of expectation of trying to be the audacious one. Whereas doing that same work in Japan created great stress and anxiety because this possibility of failure was huge, and as a result, everybody was looking to see who they could blame when things didn't go right. So there was very little ownership, and once again, we know that that will break apart any kind of change management process. So I think it's worth asking ourselves, what are our organization's tolerance for risk, for failure? How does this impact our employees' reaction to change? And how can we use coaching as a tool to really help create an environment where people are willing to take risks, they're able to manage the ambiguity, and to tolerate the change that we're asking of them. So at this point, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions or insights. We'd love to hear stories that you all have, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Implementing change phase. And I think that is one area where this coaching model can be very powerful. I think we have to step back and look at what is driving the resistance and really take time to honestly listen to what our employees have to say. What is it that is, do they not believe in the change? Is there fear around the change? Do they feel they're not supported? Are they working in an environment that the change might create some type of failure on their end, that they'll be left holding the bag? So what is it at the heart? It's really driving the resistance. And then I think it's working with this employee and asking them the deep level questions. What would it take for you to feel supported in taking on this change? If you were managing this change process, what systems might you put into place to make it move more effectively? What will you be able to bring to the table that can be built upon with your other fellow employees to make this more successful? So you're really engaging them in the thought process, in the implementation process, in the problem-solving process, and then you're listening to them on a very deep level so that you might be able to adjust some of the strategies you have that can shift them from a resistor to somebody that is really highly engaged and ready to move forward. successful and done well, and then help deconstruct that. So ask them questions. What in this situation made you feel comfortable? How did you feel supported? What made this situation different from other situations? And really help them deconstruct what went well. And then try and take those parts and say, how could we apply this to this situation? And I think it's also helpful if you can work with an employee that's very insecure in building security in one domain or one area. And just so rather than saying, okay, I'm going to just try and really build this person's confidence up across every area, that might be too daunting. But find one thing that you think you can improve their confidence on and specifically and strategically work on that. And then once you have a little success there, move to another area. It can be a time draining process, so I think you have to balance that against the other demands on your time. But I think if you go for small wins, for small commitments, you'll find that there gets to be some momentum and this person can start to move along in the process a little bit more rapidly. That's a great question. And I think one is asking yourself to sit in their situation, in their shoes, and ask the question, what's in it for me? And I think if you can target one strong thing that might be in it for these employees and make sure your change management strategy is driving that point home, you're going to be creating a line of motivation for them. So maybe it's going to be a more effective process for them to handle customer complaints. Maybe it's going to be a bonus plan at the end. I don't know, but it's really about getting into their mindset and thinking, what's in it for me, and helping drive that process. So that's a great question, because some of these more in-depth coaching conversations can get a little personal because they do really encompass the whole person. When we're starting to talk about drive and motivation and sense of purpose, we are going beyond just executing a certain process for a job. So when we really start looking at a whole person and how they're showing up at work and what is driving and motivating them, we're having deeper level conversations. But coaching is very different in that it is performance oriented. We're looking at how to increase performance and productivity and engagement. We're not really looking at what are some of the driving factors that might be addressed in therapy or counseling. And this goes back to a little bit of that question around how do you coach somebody that's insecure. You know, that could turn into a therapy session very easily. But with that, if we keep it very focused on performance, it's goal-oriented, it's very specific, we're going to be moving more towards productivity and engagement, less into therapy and counseling, which many of us as managers, we are not licensed or credentialed to do, and it's not really appropriate in the workplace. But for people who, even with this idea of what coaching is and that it's performance-oriented, having these conversations still might be a little challenging, out of the norm. So an example, I was doing a training at the United States Air Force Academy. They were looking at putting some coaching systems into place. And one of the, I believe he was a lieutenant colonel, said, you know, we don't use the word feel in our culture. We don't say, I feel this or I feel this about my work. And I said, that is absolutely fine. In the coaching world, we don't have to be talking in this touchy-feely way. We can be talking about what is the impact of this experience on me? How does this experience drive me? How does this experience curtail my efforts? So a lot of times, effectively using this coaching methodology is about using the right language around it, that it's action-oriented language and it's performance-oriented language as opposed to counseling or therapy language. I hope that helps. I'm sorry, were those remarks from me or from participants? Well, I just would like to invite people to join us for coaching training if you have any interest in exploring some of these ideas further. We do week-long trainings in the United States, in Hawaii, and in Hong Kong. We also will be doing a one-day training in Singapore this year, and so my contact information is below, and we also do webinar trainings as well. And so I'd like to invite you to our website, www.lifeboundcoaching.com, if you'd like more information. And then I also would like to extend a wholehearted invitation to you all to join us here in the United States this June. We have a global-minded conference where we're bringing together industry leaders, policy experts, education experts, business leaders from around the world to address some of the biggest employment and talent pipeline issues facing the world today. And I think our topic around change management is definitely something that will be addressed here, but also it's an opportunity to say, how are people around the world dealing with some of these employment issues, these business issues, cultivating the best type of talent for their organizations. And so we would love to have you join us if you're interested, and you can learn more at our website, www.globalminded.org. And I'd like to thank you and everybody at the Gulf Business Network for